Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of FFG Live. My name's Evan, and I'm joined here today by our intrepid X-Wing developers. Would you care to introduce yourselves for the camera?
I'm Max Brook. I've been doing this X-Wing development thing for a while.
Yep.
I'm Brooks Fluger-Levitt. I've been working on it for the last 2 years or so.
All right. And so, as you all know, we're here today to talk about X-Wing Summer Points Update, as well as the Wave 4 points, which many of you around the world have already gotten through a variety of means. They'll be coming out for all the rest of you, global release on July 12th. So you can look forward to that. But we're going to have all the points for Wave 4 and all of the points from the Summer Points Update up right after this. We're not going to get into too much of the individual, like this point, this is now this is now that. We're going to keep it more top level for this, and then right after the stream ends, you'll be able to go and look at those PDFs and see all the points. We will get into some of the more important of the minutiae, of course.
We'll throw a few in there for you.
Yeah, of course. So let's get started with talking about like what are kind of the big changes that we're looking at with this points update. What can people get excited about?
Well, the biggest, probably the most fundamental straight-up change is that the modified YC 1300 is getting some special modifications, which is to say it's losing the illicit slot and picking up an additional modification slot.
Interesting.
And this is basically because there's certain archetypes of lists that can use the illicit in combination with a whole laundry list of other cards to have an inertial dampeners that doesn't really run out because its shields don't run out.
Right.
It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. But I think with the double modification, it'll open up some pretty interesting things. The other nice thing this does is it actually creates a nice differentiation between it and the customized and scavenged YT 1300s, which do still have the illicit. So if you want to play Han with inertial dampeners, you can be able to do it in Resistance now.
Sure. So
or Scum.
It mixes up that. It kind of breaks up that list.
Yeah.
That was maybe skewing the meta a little bit, or at least having an effect you didn't want it to have in the game. Okay, so that's kind of the one big huge change. What else are we looking at with this?
So one kind of sweeping examination we did is we looked at a number of different cards that have force multiplying abilities, effects that apply across a number of ships, whether it's a pilot and their ship that applies this effect, or a crew card that applies the effect across the entire squad. He looked at a number of them and kind of adjusted them to better reflect their actual impact on the game. So some of them, notably Leia Organa for the Rebel crew, is going up. Others are going down. A number of the Imperial crew are getting more accessible to use if you want to theme your force around a specific character.
Sure.
Also, probably the single biggest fixed points change is Drea Renthal in the Y-Wing, whose points are going up to reflect her widespread ability on generics and the similar effect she has to Howl Runner on a much more durable chassis.
Yeah, her price is increasing like 7 points, correct?
Yep.
All right. And what you called out like Leia specifically? That's probably one that warrants. Do you know the exact points cost that she is now off the top of your head?
Yeah, Leia is going up to 6 points.
Right.
We messed around with fixing her at a couple different points values.
Yep.
We didn't want to take her up as high as she was when she started because nobody played her back then. And
maybe
that was just because people were undervaluing her. Probably she was overcosted. So hopefully 6 is the Goldilocks spot. We can continue to fiddle with it as time goes on, but I think she's close.
I see a ton of people in the chat. 6 is the perfect amount for Leia. The one person says, but in my heart, she's a 10. So we have that. Okay, so looking at force multiplying abilities across the board, and then what else are we looking at with this points update?
The last sort of strategic points change is we did a sort of an audit of the Initiative 6 and the particularly powerful Initiative 5 pilots. So we went through them. A lot of them went up in price a couple of points. It's not any substantial jumps. It's sort of the 1 to 3 range.
Sure.
None of those were overperforming at an extreme level. And we want them to be good. We want the characters like Darth Vader to be in the game and to be effective. So we're taking them up a little bit, and we can always go up more over time if we need to. Initiative is something we're always keeping our eye on, and we're always trying to evaluate. But and we want to make sort of measured changes there because we feel like, by and large, things are in the ballpark. and it's just sort of a matter of getting things in the right place. So wedge is going up a little bit.
Yeah, they're asking about that.
I saw over your shoulder.
Yes.
There's wedge.
Yes, lots of wedges. Do we want to say how much he is exactly at this point?
Sure. Let's pull that up.
All right. Oh, okay.
I think it's.
You mean you don't just know every point off the
There
top
are
of your
something
head?
like 400 pilots in this game.
I'm hearing excuses, sir. Here he is.
So he will be 55 points.
55 points. There we
which
have it.
he is still quite good from all the internal testing, it seems. I don't
Yeah.
think there's any danger of wedge leaving compared
And
to
he has a
X-Wing.
special place in our hearts.
Yes, naturally. Okay, so it sounds like most of these changes, it's not like we're making sweeping changes to the game at this point. What are kind of like your biggest goals going into this update, and how would you kind of characterize what you are trying to do with the metagame here?
So as Max actually mentioned to me before the stream when we were talking about how we'd want to kind of characterize it, it's something of a tune-up or a checkup. We go in, address the few specific pain points that have come up, make changes to the obvious efficiency pieces to give all the other really interesting pilots who probably weren't seeing play just because there were other things that were clearly more efficient than them, give them an opportunity to see the table. Address a couple of upgrade slot changes, but not many, and mostly just 1 to 4 points up or down on some of the most standout powerful or standout least powerful pieces.
So
Sure.
the Decimator's getting a little love, for instance,
Okay,
because
okay.
Decimators have been in a pretty rough place. We're hoping they'll be able to, get a bit more of a place, and especially with some Imperial crew coming down as well. We hope that people take a look at that again.
Right, and it's worth noting that both the Decimator and the modified YT-1300 are ships that are being re-released in the second edition with Wave 4 here.
Yep.
So it's topical that they're being addressed here in this update as well. Now, tons of people asking about Phantoms. What's going on with Phantoms?
Phantoms are getting some price increases. Whisper is one of the individual pilots that's performing at a very high level, going up in price. The generics are going up in price a little bit, and Juke is also going up in price a little bit.
Sure.
So you won't quite be able to fit 4 Phantoms with Juke into a list. You'll
Right.
still be able to fit 4 Phantoms.
But not with Juke.
But not with Juke.
Sure.
Still be able to give a Phantom Juke or
Yes.
even 2.
Yeah, so there's, you can still play lists like that. You can still play around with lists like that. And Phantoms have been seeing a lot of interesting uses as precision pieces in other lists too.
Yeah.
And we want them to stay in that role, of course. So they should still be something that people have a lot of fun with.
Sure. Well, all right. How do you expect these points changes to affect each of the factions in the game? I guess maybe we can just start go by era. So like with the Clone Wars, Republic, and then Separatist Alliance. What are they looking at with this points
You want to take
update?
Separatists?
So yeah, the Separatists are seeing one of the more widespread changes from a given faction, in part because the Hyena bomber is coming out in Wave 4 here.
Right.
And pretty much across the board, points are shifting for the Separatists from their ships, at least from their generic ships, to the upgrade cards commonly taken with those ships. So the Vulture Droid and some of the pilots for the Bell Blob are coming down in points, while the cost of energy shell charges and a couple of other commonly taken power piece upgrade cards for the faction are going up a similar amount, while other upgrade cards, especially faction-specific ones, are coming down. So now they'll be more attractive compared to the other upgrade cards that took their place, and the feasibility of a generic swarm of Vulture Droids or of Hyena Bombers will have more room to work.
Or Vultures supporting Hyenas to give them access to additional cheap calculates through
Which
their network
was an
calculations.
intentional part of the development of both ships.
Right, which really fits with kind of the thematic nature of the Separatists, where you just got like these swarms of these ships that all network together. But then if you want to upgrade them up, it'll cost you a little bit more.
And Grievous is dropping down a bit too, so I'm curious to see what he'll do. He's getting a little bit cheaper, and his title is getting a little bit cheaper too. So see if Grievous and a Swarm pops up a bit. That'll be interesting. interesting to see.
Okay. Yeah, I'm partial to Grievous myself. And then the Republic. What are we looking at there?
Yeah, so the Republic's in an interesting place. I mean, the N1 is a very different ship than anything the Republic has currently. And the N1 has a really interesting costing structure. I don't want to spoil anything, but the Brooks did a really, really good job at the design of that ship, and one of the things that came out of it was that it has a very non-traditional costing curve for its initiative pilots, because initiative and ability power, and even limited to one and ability and like general power are not necessarily the way you'll expect them to be. So it's a cool shift, and it's something we're trying in general of have like some of the mid-tier and even low initiative pilots have pretty potent abilities. Some of the higher initiative pilots have slightly weaker abilities. For the big lore characters, the Anakin Skywalkers, the folks like that, they're going to have powerful ability and high initiative. But for some of the secondary characters, we try either a high initiative but a more mild ability, or a lower initiative but a really cool ability. So sort of Ali Lintra on the one hand, and Jess Pava on the other, two characters that Brooks was heavily involved in creating.
So thanks for the praise. One of the things that having adjustable points cost has allowed us to do is it's given us a lot more time to test the even after the card tech itself is finalized, and that allows us to design abilities that are primarily fun and functional, and as long as we're confident that they can be balanced by points, and they're not too overpowering or too difficult to handle, we can use the points cost simply to describe the abilities of the ship and the pilot, rather than as part of this baked in all one piece. And so pilots with strong abilities will be priced appropriately, and some pilots will have weak abilities but high initiative, and may cost less than lower initiative pilots, or even sometimes on par with generics.
So in terms of the Republic, V19 Torrent was going to get a reevaluation anyway, because it's interesting that in the testing of that ship, the points of the people weren't taking the generic, and we ended up dropping the generic, and it seemed to be in a good place, and people were still taking the uniques. And then when we shifted over to the game proper, out in the world, people were like, oh, I wonder why the generic is so much cheaper. It seems like it's the properly costed one. We were like, I guess that was the properly costed one. So all the limited pilots for that and the more expensive generic are coming down a bit. Some of them a decent bit. And that also helps because that lets the N1 nicely slot in as a slightly more elite, slightly more expensive ship. And then the 19 really serves that sort of, like TIE Fighter-y, it's a filler ship or a support ship, or you do a swarm of them.
Yeah,
for two ships that have effectively the same stat bar, they're going to handle very differently in gameplay.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's then move up to the classic three factions, so Rebels and Scum and Empire. I see a lot of people are very eager to hear about what's going on with Dash Rendar.
I think Dash is staying where he is.
It's not a significant change.
Should we look him up?
If he's changing, he's not changing much.
Oops. All right, we can look him up. Maybe. Question mark. All right. Is he in this guy? I can do a find.
There we go.
There we go. 98 points.
Yeah, Dash is not changing. Dash is, there's a lot of new content coming out, and Dash has been on the edge of being quite good at his current cost a couple of times.
Yep.
And we just kind of wanted to see what happens with, the new stuff coming out, how that'll affect him. I mean, if he, perform and we see that, he will go down. If he suddenly jumps to the top again, he'll probably go up. So
sure, naturally.
So for Rebels, the biggest changes are just that a lot of the sort of Rebel efficiency pieces are going up in price. The named B-Wings are going up a bit. Wedge is going up a bit. As we've discussed, Leia is going up a bit. So a lot of the Cassian's going up a bit. So a lot of the sort of like popular efficiency pieces are just getting a bit more expensive. You won't be able to bid as much with those lists. You'll have to make some trade-offs on your upgrades or make some trade-offs on your pilots.
Yep.
But, at the end of the day, a bunch of different named Rebel ships flying together being a good archetype is pretty interesting and can be fun for the game. So as long as it's not stagnating around that, it's not trying to push out in a big way. For the Empire, I think the crew changes are probably the biggest thing. The crew
Having
changes-
access to more affordable squadron-wide or at least large area of effect abilities and cheaper and more efficient platforms to put them on
Yep.
will offer Imperial players a lot of options for a centerpiece large ship with crew and then a swarm of take your pick. There are so many different interesting TIE fighters, all with their own niche abilities. Fighters lowercase there because there's all the other variants as well.
Yeah.
And the TIE Aggressor is coming down because the poor TIE Aggressor needs some love.
Yeah.
So.
Poor TIE Aggressor.
Let's see.
And then Scum.
So for Scum is getting a decent number of points breaks across the board.
Okay.
Drea is going up, and she's part of one of the most successful Scum lists right now. So
Yep.
there are a fair number of generics that are coming down. Kyrexes are coming down a little bit in price, and Kyrexes are exchanging one of their 3 mod slots for an illicit slot. We're finding that at the end of the day, there just weren't necessarily 3 mods right now we wanted to put on a Kyrex, but
Right.
double illicit really opens things up. A couple of illicits are coming down in price too.
Nice.
Contraband Cybernetics is coming down a little bit.
Okay.
So there's a couple of things that are getting a bit cheaper, and you'll be able to do some interesting stuff with some Kyrexes. And just a number of other Scum ships, Scum large ships are getting reevaluated. Jump Masters are coming down a little bit. Houndstooth is coming down a little bit. Various things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, and then Resistance and First Order. So Resistance
for the
getting the new
Resistance,
ship.
the Resistance is first of all getting the Resistance transport, so that will give them a whole new set of options, coordinate jam, multiple crew slots on a fairly points efficient platform. Also, reverse maneuvers are very rare.
Bunch of really interesting crew.
Yep, a lot of interesting crew who are a lot of fun to design. So that will really flesh out their options more. A lot of those crew, there are a couple of straight power pieces there, but a lot of them are more about reallocating your effort and don't actually give you much more action economy. And so you'll be able to take some pretty cheap kind of utility flexible options. Also, a number of the other ships in the faction, especially mid-initiative pilots, are coming down a little bit. Although many of the high initiative pilots are staying the same or going up slightly because they're performing well. We just like to see a little bit more variety out of them. But all in all, it looks bright, and the new content is going to make them really interesting.
And I will say, you said cheap crew, but there is one crew who stands an exception to that.
Yes.
And that is Leia.
Is she our most expensive crew piece in the game?
Maybe.
She certainly deserves it.
She's certainly
She's up there
close.
with Palpatine.
Yeah. She's more than Palpatine these days because she opens up some really interesting lists.
Yeah, absolutely. And then First Order. Did we talk about that?
First Order, yeah. So the First Order is getting some pretty small incremental changes. The First Order fits really nicely with the whole idea of sort of the tune-up. So a lot of the TIE foes are coming down in price. The TIE SFs who aren't named Quick Draw are coming down in price. Upsilons are generally going up a little bit. They're a little bit efficient, so they're pushing up a tiny bit. Kylo and the Silencer, I think silencers who aren't Kylo are coming down, and those who are Kylo are staying where they are.
as you might expect. All right. So now let's look at some questions from the chat room, and feel free to keep throwing those questions at us on Twitch and on YouTube. We've got people looking at both of those, and we're going to pick out some questions. So I guess I see a ton of people asking about card packs, obviously. So I'll take that one as the member of marketing. So we're announcing Wave 6 at Gen Con this year. We're actually going to be streaming the in-flight report for the very first time. So if you are not able to join us there at the show, then you can come and it on Twitch and YouTube. July 31st is when that is. So we'll have a ton of announcements for all of FFG's everything. But some of it will be X-Wing Wave 6, and the people clamoring for card packs should be pretty happy to tune in and watch that. So that's that question. For the dev team, any consideration to a 4-month point cycle over a 6-month cycle?
Yeah, so we talked a lot about how often we wanted the point cycles, and 4 and 6 were the numbers we talked about, basically, because at the end of the day, every 3 months, probably isn't realistic. There isn't really enough time for the meta to settle out. We ultimately decided on 6 months because of two factors. So the first factor is that we do want people to feel like the game is sort of solidly set and they can basically trust it. There might be emergency changes occasionally, but by and large, we don't do that. I mean, for example, the Han with inertial dampeners build. It was a build we identified as soon as it started winning events, and we sort of, we had a discussion like, is this something we should address immediately? And we said, no, let's let it play out a little longer. It's not that long until the update. We'll get it then, and it's good.
And importantly, there were Han Solo options without inertial dampeners working just as well. It still took a lot of skill to fly, even though it could create potential unhappiness being against it. Whereas triple upsilons, on the other hand, we addressed immediately because that, even if it wasn't going to win tournaments frequently, it was going to make life really rough on players who are trying to get into the game or trying to take their first steps into the tournament scene, and really kind of stopped any of interaction by just jumping right up in people's faces immediately, and skipping part of the game.
Yeah. So anyway, the update cycle, we decided on 6 months because fundamentally we just wanted there to be sort of a solid feeling of like, hey, this is the game for a while.
Right.
And again, we can make emergency changes if we have to, and we will when the circumstances require it. But otherwise, we'd like to sort of let things sit for a little while. The difference between a list that is too efficient and a list that is, like really bad for the game is sort of also based on the how long that list sticks around, right?
Sure.
And there are a lot of ways to sort of deal with that. But at the end of the day, there are lists that are fundamentally unfun to play against. Those we are more likely to act, move to act on. On the other hand, there are lists that are just like, you just don't want to play it against it all the time. And so 6 months we felt was a good amount of time to churn things up and, without making anyone feel like the game doesn't have a solid basis.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question for you guys. The value of many upgrade cards scales directly with the cost of the platform it is attached to, which makes an entire class of upgrades most cost-effective on expensive ships. Have you considered making these types of upgrades scale with platform cost, pilot plus title plus configuration? For example, Trick Shot might only cost 1 point on a 25-point pilot, but would cost 3 points on a 75-point pilot.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, so that gets into another question, too, of, like, what are we scaling things on? Because usually when we try to scale points value, it's scaling on, some factor we can, nail it down to.
Right.
Scaling on points itself is interesting, and it gets especially interesting when you get into the question of points preservation. That's a really interesting idea. Actually, I am not sure we talked about that. We will now, I guess.
We talked about variations on that.
Yeah, other ways to try to capture that.
But all of our existing point scaling systems are based off of stats on the ship card, or stats on the ship card, but that can be changed by other upgrade cards, simply for intelligibility's sake, so that players can look at their components and look at the PDF or the app and have a reasonable expectation of what they will get when they hit add, and if it's scaling by too many factors, if it's changing too often, we'd rather it be easier to use, and like there are minute bits of difference, but we'll sort of err on the side of caution in most cases anyways.
Also, broadly speaking, our feeling of sort of the success of an upgrade card is if an upgrade card is getting used in some lists, and especially if it's getting used in places where it's sort of iconic,
right?
It's probably in an okay place if it's not the best on every single pilot. Different pilots should favor different upgrades to some degree, and it's okay if that happens. So, that helps there be variety.
If you saw the same upgrade card on every ship, that wouldn't be any fun. And that's kind of borne out by some of the lists that we've changed because of that.
Yeah.
All right. Question about TIE Strikers. This person's saying TIE Striker generics are notoriously terrible, especially compared to the unique TIE Strikers. I get you might not want to allow 6 Strikers in a list. Have you considered adding limited restrictions to a ship chassis via the point PDF, i.e. a list can contain a max of 5 Strikers to be able to price the generic ships differently?
So we have discussed this option. We've discussed nearly anything you can think of at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah.
We've decided we didn't want to pursue this one at the moment in particular because when possible, we prefer not to errata cards. We like it if you can trust the card.
Yeah.
And know that the points will change. But, I mean, this does highlight an interesting problem that we do grapple with in various ways, that there are certain things that are, difficult to point fairly because of those breakpoints. And that's something we're aware of and we think about a lot, but we don't have any intention to implement that particular solution.
Right. All right. Let's see. For the Phantoms, why just a point change and not upgrade slot tweaking, specifically on the generic?
We felt that a point change would accomplish the goals we had for it.
Yeah.
And-
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. A rules question here. How does rigged cargo chute work when dropped on a ship?
So this is going to be in a future FAQ. We hear this question. So when you drop it on the ship, it gains the stress, it rolls the die.
Yep. The effects of overlapping the obstacle apply even though the ship is not currently executing a maneuver or otherwise moving. This is actually in the FAQ already, and it specifies that the token is placed underneath the ship and the ship overlaps it. We know there's been some discussion about that point still, but yes, whatever the effects of the placed obstacle or mine or device or other object are, they resolve if they're placed underneath the ship. And that's the time it would resolve.
Yeah, and we are going to add some more language to the FAQ just to make that a little even clearer. Because, the arguments around that are very interesting and a very good study in language and intentions and readings.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, some questions about the delay of Wave 4 and then releases. So Wave 4 basically fell back a little bit because we wanted to get a simultaneous global release and have all the release it at once. Now, obviously, there were some issues with that with regards to Australia and Barnes & Noble, but that was kind of the intention behind delaying so that, it wouldn't be like the US has Wave 4 and none of the rest of the world does, or they have it, months and months later. Not that long, weeks and weeks later. In terms of upcoming releases, so for Wave 5, we're currently looking at later in the third quarter of this year, and then Epic following pretty shortly thereafter, having the Epic ships sort of staggered out, and you'll actually see the announcements on these Epic ships coming soon. Yes, huge ships. Thank you.
It's okay.
First edition mine.
I do it too.
The huge ships and the Epic Battles expansion. Yes. Those will be coming early in the fourth quarter then of this year. And even Wave 6 is expected before the end of the year. So that's your update on releases. Let's see here.
I look forward to all the Epic releases, especially.
Oh yeah, I'm excited.
Any changes in what's available for Hyperspace? People asking a lot about Hyperspace.
So the new stuff that is being released is going to be entering Hyperspace, obviously. But there are not any removals at current. We've been talking a lot about sort of strategic plans for how we want to organize Hyperspace. But obviously OP will be communicating more about that. But we do have a plan when it comes to when things will leave Hyperspace, etc.
Yep. All right. Have you considered player one changing each round? This would help with bid wars. Also, how about all bid is counted as points lost right when you start the game? How about your bid is counted as points lost right when you start the game?
So the bid is a really interesting subject. And this is where Epic gets into this, or X-Wing, sorry, gets into this just really interesting space of like game and metagame and playing the tournament and all this stuff. I'd be happy to take the changing every round question if you want the biggest points lost question.
Actually, let's reverse this because I know I remember the discussion about alternating initiative. I don't think I've been involved in any.
Sounds good. Well, why don't you do that then?
So, if initiative changes each round, that does mean that each player has the opportunity to have their highest initiative ship move last if they're the same initiative. But it also creates a ever more complex potential board state the farther ahead you try to plan. as you are not only trying to control the range between you and your opponent for the purposes of actions like target lock and jam, and ordnance weapons with limited ranges and range bonuses and how far your maneuvers go, but also that if that is changing every turn you try and plan out into the future, who will go first or not, it was tried a little bit and continued to create this overly complex game state that was a bit of a brain burn. And a lot of X-Wing's strength is in its approachability and its ease of play, and we felt that it wasn't worth it at the time.
Yeah, so we experimented with this at the start of second edition. We just found it was not the direction we wanted to take the game for exactly the reasons Brooks laid out. Now, I will say, I actually think, interestingly, if you're playing at your kitchen table and you want to do it that way, and you're not thinking too much about any move beyond the one you're making right now, it probably works fine. Yeah. But especially if you're really trying to strategize, it puts a lot of additional mental load into the game. Whether that's good or bad, maybe debated, but I do agree that X-Wing's approachability is a huge part of its
and there have also been some multiplayer furball game modes people have done where they ignored initiative completely and they just passed first player around the table each round. That it sounds like worked pretty well.
Yeah.
So
I think there's a ton of fascinating stuff with sort of alternate play modes that can be explored and will be explored in the near future.
Yes. Interestingly, also, as a bit of an aside, in terms of development, we do have some abilities that are working outside of the normal framework of initiative, and many of them are potentially quite powerful. For example, the new unique hyena droid, DBS-32C, who is going to let you calculate and then spend that calculate as a coordinate later in the round. Passive sensors is going to change the impact on moving first or last in terms of particularly acquiring target locks for your ordnance attacks. But I'm sure players will come up with other creative uses for it as well. And a number of other things going forwards. It's not going to be something we focus on too heavily, but there will be often something that gives players an opportunity to do something out of sequence in a fairly controlled way.
So as to the bid as points lost question, that's something we've discussed a lot. We've tested various versions of it. We haven't found an easy silver bullet, and we haven't found that to be the easy silver bullet to the bid question.
Right.
So that's a very we are constantly discussing and experimenting with things on that. It's something we're always sort of researching, but we haven't found an easy, obvious win there. So
yeah.
One thing on of researching that having some ongoing points testing allows us to do is spend some time to do a little bit of research of what if we tried this differently, what if we tried that differently, what if certain components were priced more heavily or less heavily, or certain other game rules were tweaked or changed.
Yeah, so we sometimes will dedicate a period of that testing to just like, hey, we're going to try recosting this sort of thing.
And a lot more possibilities get tested than actually get implemented.
Yes.
I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about Final Salvo. Like, is it here to stay? How it interacts with Fortress? Is that all okay? And those kinds of things.
We're keeping an eye on it.
Yeah.
It's something we're always looking at. We discussed whether we wanted to make any changes in this update. Based on the timing of the discussions, we decided that we didn't want to act hastily.
Right.
We want to make sure if we implement a different solution, it's actually better. Because if we're going to make everyone relearn how to play the game, it should be to their benefit.
Yeah.
So that is something we are very aware of and very interested in continuing to look into.
Yeah. So still on the table. All right. I think that is just about the time that we have for our stream here. Everyone's very eager to get to the actual points, which obviously we need to end this before,
don't let us stand
before those will go up. Do you guys have anything that you want to say to the X-Wing fans before we wrap up?
Thanks for coming on here to watch us talk about points and ask us questions. This is fun.
Yeah, it's great. Now go back and as soon as we're off, play your games.
Yeah, so points are going up right after this for it's the summer points update for all existing ships, and then the Wave 4, the new ships will also have points in those PDFs. Our squad builder will be updated on July 10th, which is around the same time that those points become legal in tournaments, a little bit after, I believe. And then Wave 4's release date, July 12th. So for FFG Live itself, so we're going to have a little bit of a break here for the next week or so for the 4th of July. We're coming back on July 18th for a couple of streams in the middle of July. And then...
Back July 9th.
July 9th? Oh, okay. All right. Back on July 9th, thank you, for a couple of streams in July. And then we're going to go into our season break leading up to Gen Con. So Gen Con, we're streaming the in-flight report for the first time on July 31st, so come and join us there. There will be X-Wing news. The Card Packs fans should come out in force and come and watch that. And then we're back. So
There'll be a lot of news for a lot of people.
Exactly. So on break for a little bit, come back, join us July 9th. Make sure you subscribe, hit that bell icon so you're notified whenever we post new content. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We'll see you guys next time.